is a neat trick to talk seriously and soberly about the prospects of terrorists gaining access to nuclear materials and yet not lapse into hyperbole or towards creating the terror for them. Our third story, in a new documentary film, former CIA covert operative Valerie Plame tries that tightrope act. She'll join us in a moment. But first, the details. We know that al-Qaeda and its associates are interested in obtaining nuclear weapons. We also know for sure that if they were to get one, there would be little doubt they would try to use it. The film, Countdown to Zero, outlines how just one misstep in policy in counterterrorism efforts, one simple accident, could lead to global disaster. And while the Obama administration is now taking the lead on nuclear arms reduction, it is hard to rest easy. White House counterterrorism advisor John Brennan explained back in April, over the years, al-Qaeda, including some senior al-Qaeda members, have claimed that they already have such nuclear capability or weapons. That's not proved, but also at the same time, it's difficult to disprove something like that. The crucial backstory, explained by Ms. Plame in the film and other experts: al-Qaeda tried to obtain highly enriched uranium from Sudan in the early 90s, but was scammed. Well, just before 9/11's attacks, Osama bin Laden and his deputy al-Zawahiri met with two Pakistani nuclear scientists to discuss nuclear weapons. Nuclear terrorism expert Graham Allison summing up their motivation.
The objective of al-Qaeda is to, quote, kill 4 million Americans, including 2 million children. This is, in his calculation, what's required to balance the scales of justice. He takes various incidents from Shatila to the war in Iraq and counts up the body count and says that's how many people we're owed, 4 million. You're not going to get to kill 4 million people by hijacking airplanes and crashing them into buildings.
Joining me now, as promised, former CIA operative Valerie Plame Wilson. She appears in the documentary Countdown to Zero, which opens July 23rd in New York. Well, it's a pleasure to see you in person, finally.
Thank you for having me.
So without the fear-mongering, without, another phony war, what is the coolest-headed solution to keeping nukes out of the hands of terrorists?
The movie Countdown to Zero, I think, makes a very compelling and powerful argument that the only way to do this is ultimately to get to zero. You have to, I like to use the expression, drain the swamp. No one has any notions that this is either going to be done unilaterally, it won't be done easily, it will take time. But this is, once you see the movie, you understand the only way we can make sure that there is no accidental nuclear explosions is to get to zero.
Do you not have to also essentially roll back the knowledge of how to make these things? Do you have to make it like sort of the future equivalent of alchemy, where you look back and go, maybe they knew how to do this and maybe they didn't really know how to do this?
Well, fortunately, it's still very much a pro's job. The good news is that there has never been a nuclear program that intelligence was not able to ultimately detect. It's huge infrastructure, it's very expensive. The downside is that because now we're no longer in that bipolar world, the genie is out of the bottle. When I was working for the CIA, I worked at that nexus of terrorism, WMD. That is how the world has changed significantly. And that is where the proliferation really, the concern is from the terrorists.
Is there, in the interim, while that long-term project is worked on, and obviously it would be a long-term project, is there any comfort provided by somebody like the Times Square bomber who went and got potting clay instead of fertilizer, who thought he could light the thing up with fireworks, and who locked his keys in the car bomb? And I'm not trying to make fun of that by any stretch of the imagination. I live here. But detonating just an ordinary bomb, it was beyond this man's capability. Detonating, as you said, the nuclear materials are if you're not a professional, something bad is going to happen. It's going to happen to you first. You
know, he was particularly feckless, that's for sure. Yeah. But that doesn't take away how critical and how pressing this threat is. This has not been an issue that's been talked about very much since the end of the Cold War. It hasn't been in vogue. The Cold War ended and we kind of put it to the side. However, as the film points out, there's, for instance, a scene with a car thief in one of the former Soviet republics. And on the side, he thought he would sell some highly enriched uranium, fissile material. And one of the commentators in the film says, potatoes are guarded better than highly enriched uranium.
2002, as you will recall, we were told nukes to terrorists, Iraq. Now we're told nukes to terrorists, Iran. How much of it is hysteria and how much of it is real, and how can that threat and the idea that a state sponsor for some sort of terrorism that connection might actually exist at some point?
That's the scary part, that it is not hysteria. The threat is very real. And it's not just that. There's also, with nuclear weapons, a danger of miscalculation, of accidental usage. Look at a country that is perhaps on the verge of anarchy, like Pakistan. How can we be assured that their command and control structure is still, has integrity to withstand all the volatility that that country is experiencing right now? No, it's unfortunately not hysteria.
The same centrifuges that make nuclear fuel can also contain and create nuclear weapons. Do we have to rethink energy policies too, not just in this country but globally?
The film doesn't really focus on, it doesn't take a stance on nuclear energy, and I'm certainly not an expert in that. But I will speak to something that last year the United States signed an agreement with the United Arab Emirates. They called it the gold standard, whereby the UAE would in fact buy their processed fuel on the international market, so that there's no question that that's what they're getting. They're going to be using it at a particular grade of they will use it for nuclear energy rather than to process it higher into what can be used in nuclear weapons.
Well, so far so good. Former CIA officer Valerie Plame, who appears in the documentary Countdown to Zero. A great pleasure to see you, and thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.